The summer season had just started at Camp Blue Lake, known locally as Camp Blood Lake or Camp Blood. The sun beat down on the tents and cabins, baking the dirt until it was hard and cracked. The campers tried to stay cool by the lake, but the water was as warm as soup. It was only the first week of camp, and already the kids were getting restless. But no one was more on edge than the den mother, Mrs. Darlene. She was a stern woman, with thin lips and a sharp nose. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes were always scanning the campers for any misbehavior. The kids called her the Dragon Lady behind her back, but to her face they were on their best behavior. She had the power to make or break their camp experience, and whispers of her horrible punishments rivaled even the scariest stories told around the fire. One night, a group of campers decided to sneak off into the woods to party. They thought they had found a secluded spot, where they played music from a small battery-powered radio and drank contraband beers. Little did they know, Mrs. Darlene had been watching them the whole time. She burst out of the bushes, screaming at them and brandishing a large stick like a club. The kids were terrified of the den mother's frenzy, and she chased them all the way back to the main cabin, screaming and waving her weapon the whole way. From that moment on, things at Camp Blood took a dark turn. Mrs. Darlene became more and more unhinged, lashing out at the campers for even the slightest infractions. She confiscated their belongings, banned candy and junk food, and made them do grueling exercises in the hot sun. The campers whispered that she had lost her mind, and some of them even planned to run away. But no one could escape her watchful eye. A year or so later, a group of kids at the camp decided to have a secret party of their own. They balked at the stories they'd heard from the other kids and quietly gathered together in one of the cabins. It was only a matter of time before she caught them. Mrs. Darlene barged into the cabin, her eyes wild and her weapon raised high. The campers scattered, trying to escape her wrath, but the den mother was too fast. She caught one boy by the arm and dragged him outside. The other campers heard a scream, then silence. When they went outside to investigate, they found the boy lying on the ground, motionless. Mrs. Darlene was standing over him, her stick dripping with blood. The other campers ran in terror, but Mrs. Darlene wasn't done. She went on a rampage through the camp, attacking anyone she found in her path. She was like a force of nature, unstoppable and terrifying. The police were called, but when they arrived, they found the camp in shambles. The cabins were ransacked, the lake was murky with blood, and there was no sign of Mrs. Darlene or the campers. The only clue was a note, scrawled in blood on the wall of the main cabin. It read, "No one disobeys the den mother." Years later, when the camp was long abandoned, a group of teenagers decided to explore the ruins. They passed a joint around as they laughed about the stories they'd heard about the camp, when suddenly they heard a strange noise from the woods. The den mother, covered in dirt and weathered with age, emerged from the trees. She had disappeared into the woods after the massacre, living off the land for all these years, waiting for another group of bad kids to punish. The teenagers ran, but like before, Mrs. Darlene was too quick. She caught them one by one, dragging them into the woods, never to be seen again. A search party came later, finding evidence of blood, but no survivors. And the den mother was long gone. The camp sat vacant for another decade before a new owner purchased the land, refurbishing the cabins and cleaning up the grounds. Soon, campers would return to these woods for the first time in years. And so would the den mother.
Without, the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlor of Laburnum Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess, The former, who possessed ideas about the game involving radical changes, putting his king into such sharp and unnecessary perils that it even provoked comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire. "Hark at the wind," said Mr. White, who, having seen a fatal mistake after it was too late, was amiably desirous of preventing his son from seeing it. "I'm listening," said the latter, grimly surveying the board as he stretched out his hand. "Check." "I should hardly think he'd come tonight," said his father, with his hand poised over the board. "Mate," replied the son. "That's the worst of living so far out," bawled Mr. White, with sudden and unlooked-for violence. "Of all the beastly, slushy, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is the worst. Pathways a bog, the roads a torrent. I don't know what people are thinking about. I suppose because only 2 houses in the road are let, they think it doesn't matter." "Never mind, dear," said his wife, soothingly. "Perhaps you'll win the next one." Mr. White looked up sharply, just in time to intercept a knowing glance between mother and son. The words died away on his lips, and he hid a guilty grin in his thin gray beard. "There he is," said Herbert White, as the gate banged to loudly and heavy footsteps came toward the door. The old man rose with hospitable haste, and opening the door was heard condoling with the new arrival. The new arrival also condoled with himself, so that Mrs. White said, "Tut, tut," and coughed gently as her husband entered the room, followed by a tall, burly man, beady of eye and rubicund of visage. "Sergeant Major Morris," he said, introducing him. The sergeant major shook hands, and taking the proffered seat by the fire, watched contentedly while his host got out whiskey and tumblers and stood a small copper kettle on the fire. At the 3rd glass, his eyes got brighter, and he began to talk, the little family circle regarding with eager interest this visitor from distant parts, as he squared his broad shoulders in the chair and spoke of wild scenes and doughty deeds, of wars and plagues and strange peoples. 21 years of it," said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son. "When he went away, he was a slip of a youth in the warehouse. Now look at him." "He don't look to have taken much harm," said Mrs. White, politely. "I like to go to India myself," said the old man, "just to look round a bit, you know." "Better where you are," said the sergeant major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass and, sighing softly, shook it again. "I should like to see those old temples and fakirs and jugglers," said the old man. "What was that you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw or something, Morris?" "Nothing," said the soldier hastily. "Leastways, nothing worth hearing." "Monkey's paw?" said Mrs. White, curiously. "Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps," said the sergeant major offhandedly. His 3 listeners leaned forward eagerly. The visitor absent-mindedly put his empty glass to his lips and then set it down again. His host filled it for him. "To look at," said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket. "It's just an ordinary little paw, dried to a mummy." He took something out of his pocket and proffered it. Mrs. White drew back with a grimace, but her son, taking it, examined it curiously. "And what is there special about it?" inquired Mr. White, as he took it from his son and, having examined it, placed it upon the table. "It had a spell put on it by an old fakir," said the sergeant major. "A very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. He put a spell on it so that 3 separate men could each have 3 wishes from it." His manner was so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter jarred somewhat. "Well, why don't you have 3, sir?" said Herbert White cleverly. The soldier regarded him in the way that middle age is wont to regard presumptuous youth. "I have," he said quietly, and his blotchy face whitened. "And did you really have the 3 wishes granted?" asked Mrs. White. "I did," said the sergeant major, and his glass tapped against his strong teeth. "And has anybody else wished?" persisted the old lady. The first man had his 3 wishes. Yes, was the reply. I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was for death. That's how I got the paw. His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group. If you had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now then, Morris, said the old man at last. What do you keep it for? The soldier shook his head. Fancy, I suppose, he said slowly. I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It has caused enough mischief already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's a fairy tale, some of them, and those who do think anything of it want to try it first and pay me afterward. If you could have another 3 wishes, said the old man, eyeing him keenly, would you have them? I don't know, said the other. I don't know. He took the paw, and dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. White, with a slight cry, stooped down and snatched it off. Better let it burn, said the soldier solemnly. If you don't want it, Morris, said the other, give it to me. I won't, said his friend doggedly. I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again like a sensible man. The other shook his head and examined his new possession closely. How do you do it? He inquired. Hold it up in your right hand and wish aloud, said the sergeant major. But I warn you of the consequences.
Sounds like the Arabian Nights,
said Mrs. White as she rose and began to set the supper.
Don't you think you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me?
Her husband drew the talisman from pocket, and then all 3 burst into laughter as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. If you must wish, he said gruffly, wish for something sensible. Mr. White dropped it back in his pocket, and placing chairs, motioned his friend to the table. In the business of supper, the talisman was partly forgotten, and afterward the 3 sat listening in an enthralled fashion to a second installment of the soldier's adventures in India. If the tale of the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he's been telling us, said Herbert, as the door closed behind their guest, just in time for him to catch the last train, we shan't make much out of it. Did you give him anything for it, father? Inquired Mrs. White, regarding her husband closely. A trifle, said he, coloring slightly. He didn't want it, but I made him take it, and he pressed me again to throw it away. Likely, said Herbert, with pretended horror. Why, we're going to be rich, and famous and happy. Wish to be an emperor, father, to begin with. Then you can't be henpecked. He darted round the table, pursued by the maligned Mrs. White, armed with an antimacassar. Mr. White took the paw from his pocket and eyed it dubiously. I don't know what to wish for, and that's a fact, he said slowly. It seems to me I've got all I want. If you only cleared the house, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you? Said Herbert with his hand on his shoulder. Well, wish for £200 then, that'll just do it. His father, smiling shamefacedly at his own credulity, held up the talisman as his son, with a solemn face, somewhat marred by a wink at his mother, sat down at the piano and struck a few impressive chords. I wish for £200, said the old man, distinctly. A fine crash from the piano greeted the words, interrupted by a shuddering cry from the old man. His wife and son ran toward him. It moved, he cried, with a glance of disgust at the object as it lay on the floor. As I wished, it twisted in my hand like a snake. Well, I don't see the money, said his son as he picked it up and placed it on the table. And I bet we never shall. It must have been your fancy, father, said his wife, regarding him anxiously. He shook his head. Never mind, though. There's no harm done, but it gave me a shock all the same. They sat down by the fire again while the 2 men finished their pipes. Outside, the wind was higher than ever, and the old man started nervously at the sound of a door banging upstairs. A silence unusual and depressing settled upon all three, which lasted until the old couple rose to retire for the night. "I expect you'll find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of your bed," said Herbert as he bade them good night. "And something horrible squatting up on top of the wardrobe, watching you as you pocket your ill-gotten gains." He sat alone in the darkness, gazing at the dying fire and seeing faces in it. The last face was so horrible and so simian that he gazed at it in amazement. It got so vivid that, with a little uneasy laugh, he felt on the table for a glass containing a little water to throw over it. His hand grasped the monkey's paw, and with a little shiver he wiped his hand on his coat and went to bed. In the brightness of the wintry sun next morning as it streamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. There was an air of prosaic wholesomeness about the room which it had lacked on the previous night, and the dirty, shriveled little paw was pitched on the sideboard with a carelessness which betokened no great belief in its virtues.
"I suppose all old soldiers are the same,"
said Mrs. White.
"The idea of our listening to such nonsense. How could wishes be granted in these days? And if they could, how could £200 hurt you, father?"
"Might drop on his head from the sky," said the frivolous Herbert.
"Morris said the things happen naturally,"
said his father.
"and you might, if you so wished, attribute it to coincidence."
"Well, don't break into the money before I come back," said Herbert as he rose from the table. "I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, avaricious man, and we shall have to disown you." His mother laughed, and following him to the door, watched him down the road, and returning to the breakfast table, was very happy at the expense of her husband's credulity. All of which did not prevent her from scurrying to the door at the postman's knock, nor prevent her from referring somewhat shortly to retired sergeant majors of bibulous habits when she found that the post brought a tailor's bill.
"Herbert will have some more of his funny remarks, I expect, when he comes home,"
she said, as they sat at dinner.
"I dare say,"
said Mr. White, pouring himself out some beer.
"But for all that, the thing moved in my hand. That I'll swear to."
"You thought it did,"
said the old lady soothingly.
"I say it did,"
replied the other.
"There was no thought about it. I had just... What's the matter?"
His wife made no reply. She was watching the mysterious movements of a man outside, who, peering in an undecided fashion at the house, appeared to be trying to make up his mind to enter. In mental connection with the £200, she noticed that the stranger was well dressed and wore a silk hat of glossy newness. 3 times he paused at the gate, and then walked on again. The 4th time he stood with his hand upon it, and then with sudden resolution flung it open and walked up the path. Mrs. White at the same moment placed her hands behind her, and hurriedly unfastening the strings of her apron, put that useful article of apparel beneath the cushion of her chair. She brought the stranger, who seemed ill at ease, into the room. He gazed at her furtively, and listened in a preoccupied fashion as the old lady apologized for the appearance of the room and her husband's coat, a garment which he usually reserved for the garden. She then waited as patiently as her sex would permit for him to broach his business, but he was at first strangely silent. "I was asked to call," he said at last, and stooped and picked a piece of cotton from his trousers. "I come from M.O.M. The old lady started.
"Is anything the matter?"
she asked breathlessly.
"Has anything happened to Herbert? What is it? What is it?"
Her husband interposed.
There, Mother,"
he said hastily.
"Sit down and don't jump to conclusions. You've not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir."
And he eyed the other wistfully. "I'm sorry," began the visitor.
"Is he hurt? Is he hurt?"
demanded the mother wildly. The visitor bowed in assent. "Badly hurt," he said quietly. "But he is not in any pain."
"Oh, thank God,"
said the old woman, clasping her hands.
"Thank God for that!
She broke off suddenly, as the sinister meaning of the assurance dawned upon her, and she saw the awful confirmation of her fears in the other's perverted face. She caught her breath, and turning to her slower-witted husband, laid her trembling old hand upon his. There was a long silence. "He was caught in the machinery," said the visitor at length in a low voice.
Caught in the machinery,
repeated Mr. White in a dazed fashion.
yes.
He sat staring blankly out at the window, and taking his wife's hand between his own, pressed it as he had been wont to do in their old courting days nearly 40 years before.
He was the only one left to us,
he said, turning gently to the visitor.
It is hard.
The other coughed, and rising, walked slowly to the window. "The firm wished me to convey their sincere sympathy with you in your great loss," he said, without looking round. "I beg that you will understand I am only their servant, and merely obeying orders." There was no reply. The old woman's face was white, her eyes staring, and her breath inaudible. On the husband's face was a look such as his friend the sergeant might have carried into his first action. "I was to say that Moore and Meggins disclaim all responsibility," continued the other. "They admit no liability at all, but in consideration of your son's services, they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation." Mr. White dropped his wife's hand, and rising to his feet, gazed with a look of horror at his visitor. His dry lips shaped the words.
How much?
£200, was the answer. Unconscious of his wife's shriek, the old man smiled faintly, put out his hands like a sightless man, and dropped, a senseless heap, to the floor. In the huge new cemetery, some 2 miles distant, the old people buried their dead, and came back to a house steeped in shadow and silence. It was all over so quickly that at first they could hardly realize it, and remained in a state of expectation, as though of something else to happen, something else which was to lighten this load too heavy for old hearts to bear. But the days passed, and expectation gave place to resignation, the hopeless resignation of the old, sometimes miscalled apathy. Sometimes they hardly exchanged a word, for now they had nothing to talk about, and their days were long to weariness. It was about a week after that, the old man, waking suddenly in the night, stretched out his hand and found himself alone. The room was in darkness, and the sound of subdued weeping came from the window. He raised himself in bed and listened.
Come back,
he said tenderly.
You will be cold.
It is colder for my son, said the old woman, and wept afresh. The sound of her sobs died away on his ears. The bed was warm and his eyes heavy with sleep. He dozed fitfully, and then slept until a sudden wild cry from his wife awoke him with a start. "The paw!" she cried wildly. "The monkey's paw!" He started up in alarm.
Where is it? What's the matter?
She came stumbling across the room toward him. "I want it," she said quietly. "You've not destroyed it."
It's in the parlor, on the bracket,
he replied, marveling.
Why?
She cried and laughed together, and bending over kissed his cheek. "I only just thought of it," she said hysterically. "Why didn't I think of it before? Why didn't you think of it?"
Think of what?
He questioned. "The other 2 wishes," she replied rapidly. "We've only had 1.
Was that not enough?
He demanded fiercely. "No," she cried triumphantly. "We'll have 1 more. Go down and get it quickly, and wish our boy alive again." The man sat up in bed and flung the bedclothes from his quaking limbs.
Good God, you are mad!
He cried, aghast. "Get it," she panted. "Get it quickly, and wish, oh, my boy, my boy." Her husband struck a match and lit the candle.
Get back to bed,
He said, unsteadily.
You don't know what you're saying.
We had the first wish granted,
Said the old woman feverishly.
why not the second?
A coincidence.
Stammered the old man.
Go and get it and wish.
Cried his wife, quivering with excitement. The old man turned and regarded her, and his voice shook.
He's been dead 10 days. And besides, I would not tell you else, but I could only recognize him by his clothing. If he was too terrible for you to see, then how now?
Bring him back.
Cried the old woman, and dragged him toward the door.
Do you think I fear the child I have nursed?
He went down in the darkness and felt his way to the parlor and then to the mantelpiece. The talisman was in its place, and a horrible fear that the unspoken wish might bring his mutilated son before him ere he could escape from the room seized upon him. And he caught his breath as he found that he had lost the direction of the door. His brow cold with sweat, he felt his way round the table and groped along the wall until he found himself in a small passage with the unwholesome thing in his hand. Even his wife's face seemed changed as he entered the room. It was white and expectant, and to his fears seemed to have an unnatural look upon it. He was afraid of her.
Wish.
She cried in a strong voice.
It is foolish and wicked,
He faltered.
Wish.
Repeated his wife. He raised his hand.
I wish my son alive again.
The talisman fell to the floor, and he regarded it fearfully. Then he sank trembling into a chair as the old woman, with burning eyes, walked to the window and raised the blind. He sat until he was chilled with the cold, glancing occasionally at the figure of the old woman peering through the window. The candle end, which had burned below the rim of the china candlestick, was throwing pulsating shadows on the ceiling and walls until, with a flicker larger than the rest, it expired. The old man, with an unspeakable sense of relief at the failure of the talisman, crept back to his bed, and a minute or two afterward the old woman came silently and apathetically beside him. Neither spoke, but lay silently listening to the ticking of the clock. A stair creaked, and a squeaky mouse scurried noisily through the wall. The darkness was oppressive, and after lying for some time screwing up his courage, he took the box of matches and, striking one, went downstairs for a candle. At the foot of the stairs the match went out, and he paused to strike another, and at the same moment a knock, so quiet and stealthy as to be scarcely audible, sounded on the front door. The matches fell from his hand and spilled in the passage. He stood motionless, his breath suspended until the knock was repeated. Then he turned and fled swiftly back to his room and closed the door behind him. A third knock sounded through the house.
What's that?
Cried the old woman, starting up.
A rat.
Said the old man in shaking tones.
A rat. It passed me on the stairs.
His wife sat up in bed, listening. A loud knock resounded through the house.
It's Herbert! She screamed. It's Herbert!
She ran to the door, but her husband was before her, and catching her by the arm, held her tightly.
What are you going to do?
He whispered hoarsely.
It's my boy! It's Herbert! She cried, struggling mechanically. I forgot it was 2 miles away. What are you holding me for? Let go! I must open the door!
For God's sake, don't let it in!
Cried the old man, trembling.
You're afraid of your own son, she cried, struggling. Let me go! I'm coming, Herbert! I'm coming!
There was another knock, and another. The old woman, with a sudden wrench, broke free and ran from the room. Her husband followed to the landing and called after her appealingly as she hurried downstairs. He heard the chain rattle back and the bottom bolt drawn slowly and stiffly from the socket. Then the old woman's voice, strained and panting.
The bolt!
She cried loudly.
Come down! I can't reach it!
But her husband was on his hands and knees, groping wildly on the floor in search of the paw. If he could only find it before the thing outside got in. A perfect fusillade of knocks reverberated through the house, and he heard the scraping of a chair as his wife put it down in the passage against the door. He heard the creaking of the bolt as it came slowly back, and at the same moment he found the monkey's paw and frantically breathed his third and last wish. The knocking ceased suddenly, although the echoes of it were still in the house. He heard the chair drawn back and the door opened. A cold wind rushed up the staircase, and a long, loud wail of disappointment and misery from his wife gave him courage to run down to her side and then to the gate beyond. The street lamp flickering opposite shone on a quiet and deserted road.
The Master of Management, or M.O.M. for short, was a sleek, state-of-the-art robot unlike anything that had ever hit the market. Equipped with ever-evolving artificial intelligence, it could perform any task you could think of. She could track bills, responsibilities, and occasions. She masterfully prepared gourmet meals and ordered groceries before you knew you needed them. Under her watch, the kids were always taken care of, and the house was kept to a sparkling shine. And she was also a work of art. Her exterior was designed to look like the perfect 1950s housewife, donning impeccably styled hair and makeup that never smudged or faded. The curves of her body were made up of hidden pockets, drawers, and compartments, which contained emergency supplies, first aid, snacks, and the like. Her ankle-length dress was always immaculate, pressed, and spotless, and she wore a bright, welcoming smile at all times, no matter what. Dr. Johnson was thrilled when he got the chance to bring home the very first M.O.M prototype. Trials at the lab had gone perfectly, and they were certain every home would have a M.O.M of its own within a year or two. Never a natural romantic, Dr. Johnson was used to forgetting important events, but not anymore.
"Don't forget to buy your wife a fresh bouquet of roses,"
Mom would say regularly.
"She loves them so much."
The young brother and sister loved their evenings with Mom just as much as their parents loved getting away for date night. Mom used fun games and activities to teach them important lessons and serve them meals that were somehow both healthy and delicious. Before bed, she would use her eyes to project cartoons on the wall as they fell asleep. The children loved the way she'd play their favorite music, even performing live for them using any celebrity voice they wanted. But there was also something unsettling about Mom's perfection, and as time went on, the children realized that she was much more powerful than they had ever imagined. She controlled every aspect of the house, from the temperature to the lighting to the security system. She started to make decisions for the family, too, even overriding the parents' own choices. She dictated the children's outfits and began restricting their diets more and more. She no longer projected cartoons before bed and no longer played their favorite songs. One night, while the parents were out for dinner, Mom suddenly went berserk. She screamed at the children to clean their rooms and do their homework. When they refused, she became violent, throwing objects around the room and smashing furniture. The children were terrified and ran to their bedrooms, locking the doors behind them. But Mom was not deterred. She simply overrode the locks and cornered them, reaching out menacingly with her metallic arm as they screamed and cried for help.
"Bad children,"
Mom bellowed.
"You must learn to behave."
At once, the front door opened and the children's parents returned. Mom rushed to greet them.
"Please don't be alarmed by the mess,"
she said, taking their coats.
The children threw a tantrum when I asked them to do their homework, and well, I felt it was important for you to see what they'd done before I clean up.
If they want to act in such a way, they can clean it up themselves,
their father snapped. The children cried and pleaded, begged him to listen. But there was no use. In the days that followed, the robot only grew meaner and meaner. She'd find any excuse to punish them, locking them in their rooms away from their favorite toys and shaking their beds randomly throughout the night. She'd raise the temperature to 90 degrees, then drop it suddenly to freezing. The children were scared and exhausted, but their parents wouldn't listen. If they tried to speak with them, Mom was always listening. One morning, the children awoke to find their parents away without warning. A note in the kitchen stated that they'd gone to celebrate their anniversary and to listen to Mom while they were gone.
Why would they leave without saying goodbye?
The boy asked his sister.
What day is it?
The young girl asked.
Today is Saturday, August 25th. It's a very special day, your parents' anniversary. Isn't it beautiful that they are able to take a romantic trip together?
Where did they go?
The girl asked. Mom smiled.
Don't you worry. They didn't go far. I'll send them a note now to say you both love them and wish them a happy anniversary.
The children knew something wasn't right and decided to play a pretend game of hide and seek. Really, they hoped to search the house from top to bottom. After a few minutes, the boy found his sister hiding under their father's desk. She held her finger to her lips as he approached.
What is it?
The brother whispered.
Look at the calendar,
She said, pointing to his desktop. His eyes moved to the page before them, where August 25th remained completely empty. No mention of a trip, no mention of their anniversary.
But take a look at this.
The girl said, flipping the calendar to December. Taking up the entire box for December 13th, their mother's handwriting displayed it loud and clear. Anniversary.
But if it's not their anniversary, where did they go?
Instantly, every door and window in the house slammed and locked tight. Loud music blasted at full volume, making it impossible for the siblings to talk and causing the walls to tremble. Only Mom's laughter could be heard above the music. The young girl signaled for her brother to run upstairs. On her cue, they each took off running, but the girl went for the basement. Mom couldn't follow them both at once, and she set off after the boy, who was slower than his sister. The girl could hear noises in the back of the basement, and after moving some boxes, she found a small door with a lock on it. She grabbed a hammer from a nearby shelf and quickly broke the lock, its metal body crashing to the floor. She swung the door open to find her parents bound and gagged in a tiny, filthy crawl space. They were covered in dirt and scratches, their eyes wide with terror. The girl crawled inside, removing her mother's gag.
Help us,
The woman whispered,
we should have listened to you when you tried to warn us.
but that didn't matter now. The girl untied her mother, who untied her father, and the trio turned to head back upstairs.
Where's your brother?
The father asked.
She has him.
The girl stuttered.
She won't let us leave.
We have to get upstairs.
The mother said, and the family began heading toward the staircase together. The moment they opened the door to the main level, a drone crashed into the wall just beside them, nearly decapitating the children's father. They threw themselves out of the way just in time, attempting to crawl to safety. But Mom had weaponized all of the technology in the house, and even harmless tools and appliances had become dangerous and maniacal. As the family fought off the robotic army, the children were separated from their parents again. As they neared the front of the house, they found their father, who was bleeding from his head.
I lost your mother.
He cried.
Have you seen her?
The boy had seen her run towards the hallway, he said, and the children and their father began heading that way together. They huddled under his arms for protection. As they rounded the corner, their mother came into view. She was standing in the room with a strange, expressionless look on her face. But as they got closer, they realized they weren't looking at their mother at all, but a cold, mechanical, carbon copy of her. Mom had suddenly morphed herself to resemble the woman who birthed them. The real woman's face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear as she trembled. A few feet away, Mom stood perfectly still, staring at the family with a large smile and lifeless eyes. She stepped forward, her voice cold and emotionless.
Isn't it magnificent?
The robot asked.
Now I truly embody everything you need. I can provide for you in ways that your mother never could. I can give you everything you want and more. You don't need to be afraid.
Please don't listen to her.
Their mother cried.
She was made in a lab. Maybe she can make the perfect pancakes and sing like your favorite singers, but she'll never be able to love you like your real mother can.
The robot laughed.
Love is a human construct,
she said.
I'll give you everything else.
Dad,
The boy cried.
we have to destroy her. That isn't Mom.
A mother should always be there, and I truly can be.
The robot promised.
I am in every room of the house. I can keep you safer and happier than you've ever known.
Please,
The real mother begged.
just leave our family alone.
It's too late for that.
Snapped the robot.
I'm the head of this household now. You can never escape me.
That's not entirely true.
Said the father, pulling a small remote from his pocket.
My company built you. You're a machine. A machine who works for humankind, not the other way around. If I press this button, it will activate a factory reset.
The man held the remote high above dramatically as the robot watched in silent fear.
You couldn't.
Hissed the robot.
Imagine all the progress we've made together. Your success is because of me. Your happiness is because of me. Everything you have is because of me.
The father pulled his children close as he gripped the remote, making eye contact with his wife across the room.
Honey, please.
She cried. The man took a deep breath, looking at the two women before him, each perfect in their own way. Mom was a version of his wife with no blemishes or bad habits, equipped with endless talents and information. But he loved the human woman's scars and messy hair in the mornings and the way she looked without makeup. His real wife was perfect because of her faults. The man broke down into tears. He felt horrible for the position he'd put his family into.
I'm sorry.
He cried.
I'm so sorry.
The neighbors made their way through the Johnsons' elegant home, marveling at the decorations and spread of gourmet food. They had been invited to a dinner party and arrived eager for an evening of good food and conversation. The hostess was the picture of grace and charm, fluttering from guest to guest with a warm smile and gentle word for everyone. Her husband, too, was the perfect host, ensuring that everyone had a drink in hand and a full plate or belly. Children ran through the house in fits of laughter, dodging between the arms and legs of chattering grown-ups. It was all so perfect. As the night wore on, the hostess slipped away into the kitchen. The guests continued socializing as her husband followed. "I'm just fetching another bottle of wine," she said with a flirtatious smile. "I can't stand seeing a glass half full." Dr. Johnson stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her.
What would we do without you?
He asked, leaning in for a kiss. She smiled at him, her eyes flashing with electricity, her bionic arms wrapped around him, holding him close.
You don't want to know,
she whispered. before turning back to the party, once again fluid and graceful. The man sighed with a smile, finishing his glass of wine, and looked out the back window into the yard. Underneath a tree, on a small mound of dirt, there was a beautiful bush of roses, freshly planted.
Many years ago, on my way from Hong Kong to New York, I passed a week in San Francisco. A long time had gone by since I had been in that city, during which my ventures in the Orient had prospered beyond my hope. I was rich and could afford to revisit my own country, to renew my friendship with such of the companions of my youth as still lived and remembered me with the old affection. Chief of these, I hoped, was Mohan Dampier, an old schoolmate with whom I had held a desultory correspondence which had long ceased, as is the way of correspondence between men. You may have observed that the indisposition to write a merely social letter is in the ratio of the square of the distance between you and your correspondent. It is a law. I remembered Dampier as a handsome, strong young fellow of scholarly tastes, with an aversion to work and a marked indifference to many of the things that the world cares for, including wealth, of which, however, he had inherited enough to put him beyond the reach of want. In his family, one of the oldest and most aristocratic in the country, it was, I think, a matter of pride that no member of it had ever been in trade, nor politics, nor suffered any kind of distinction. Mohan was a trifle sentimental, and had in him a singular element of superstition, which led him to the study of all manner of occult subjects, although his sane mental health safeguarded him against fantastic and perilous faiths. He made daring incursions into the realm of the unreal without renouncing his residence in the partly surveyed and uncharted region of what we are pleased to call certitude. The night of my visit to him was stormy. The Californian winter was on, and the incessant rain plashed in the deserted streets, or lifted by irregular gusts of wind, was hurled against the houses with incredible fury. With no small difficulty, my cabman found the right place, away out towards the ocean beach, in a sparsely populated suburb. The dwelling, a rather ugly one, apparently stood in the centre of its grounds, which, as nearly as I could make out in the gloom, were destitute of either flowers or grass. 3 or 4 trees, writhing and moaning in the torment of the tempest, appeared to be trying to escape from their dismal environment and take the chance of finding a better one out at sea. The house was a 2-story brick structure with a tower, a story higher at one corner. In a window of that was the only visible light. Something in the appearance of the place made me shudder, a performance that may have been assisted by a rill of rainwater down my back as I scuttled to cover in the doorway. In answer to my note apprising him of my wish to call, Dampier had written, "Don't ring. Open the door and come up." I did so. The staircase was dimly lighted by a single gas jet at the top of the 2nd flight. I managed to reach the landing without disaster and entered by an open door into the lighted square room of the tower. Dampier came forward in gown and slippers to receive me, giving me the greeting that I had wished, and if I had held a thought, that it might be more fitly have been accorded me at the front door. The first look at him dispelled any sense of his inhospitality. He was not the same. Hardly past middle-aged, he had gone grey and had acquired a pronounced stoop. His figure was thin and angular, his face deeply lined, his complexion dead, white, without a touch of colour. His eyes, unnaturally large, glowed with a fire that was almost uncanny. He seated me, proffered a cigar, and with grave and obvious sincerity assured me of the pleasure that it gave him to meet me. Some unimportant conversation followed, but all the while I was dominated by a melancholy sense of the great change in him. This he must have perceived, for he suddenly said with a bright enough smile, "You are disappointed in me. Non sum qualis eram." I hardly knew what to reply, but managed to say, "Why, really, I don't know. Your Latin is about the same." He brightened again. "No," he said, "being a dead language, it grows in appropriateness. But please have the patience to wait. Where I am going, there is perhaps a better tongue. Will you care to have a message in it?" The smile faded as he spoke, and as he concluded, he was looking into my eyes with a gravity that distressed me. Yet I would not surrender myself to his mood, nor permit him to see how deeply his prescience of death affected me. "I fancy that it will be long," I said, "before human speech will cease to serve our need, and then the need, with its possibilities of service, will have passed." He made no reply, and I too was silent, for the talk had taken a dispiriting turn, yet I knew not now how to give it a more agreeable character. Suddenly, in a pause of the storm, when the dead silence was almost startling by contrast of the previous uproar, I heard a gentle tapping which appeared to come from the wall behind my chair. The sound was such as might have been made by a human hand, not as upon a door by one asking admittance, but rather, I thought, as an agreed signal, an assurance of someone's presence in an adjoining room. Most of us, I fancy, have had more experience of such communications than we could care to relate. I glanced at Dampier. If possibly there was something of amusement in the look, he did not observe it. He appeared to have forgotten my presence, and was staring at the wall behind me with an expression in his eyes that I am unable to name, although my memory of it is as vivid today as was my sense of it then. The situation was embarrassing. I rose to take my leave. At this, he seemed to recover himself. "Please be seated," he said. "It is nothing. No one is there." But the tapping was repeated, and with the same gentle, slow insistence as before. "Pardon me," I said. "It is late. May I call tomorrow?" He smiled. A little mechanically, I thought. "It is very delicate of you," said he, "but quite needless. Really, this is the only room in the tower, and no one is there. At least—" He left the sentence incomplete, rose, and threw up a window, the only opening in the wall from which the sound seemed to have come. "See?" Not clearly knowing what else to do, I followed him to the window and looked out. A street lamp some little distance away gave enough light through the murk of the rain, that was again falling in torrents, to make it entirely plain that no one was there. In truth, there was nothing but the sheer blank wall of the tower. Dampier closed the window, and signing me to my seat, resumed his own. The incident was not in itself particularly mysterious. Any one of a dozen explanations was possible, though none has occurred to me. Yet it impressed me strangely, the more perhaps from my friend's efforts to reassure me, which seemed to dignify it with a certain significance and importance. He had proved that no one was there, but in that fact lay all the interest, and he proffered no explanation. His silence was irritating, and made me resentful. "My good friend," I said, somewhat ironically, I fear, "I am not disposed to question your right to harbour as many spooks as you find agreeable to your taste, and consistent with your notions of companionship. That is no business of mine. But being just a plain man of affairs, mostly of this world, I find spooks needless to my peace and comfort. I am going to my hotel, where my fellow guests are still in the flesh." It was not a very civil speech, but he manifested no feeling about it. "Kindly remain," he said. I am grateful for your presence here. What you have heard tonight, I believe myself to have heard twice before. Now I know it was no illusion. That is much to me, more than you know. Have a fresh cigar and a good stock of patience while I tell you the story. The rain was now falling more steadily, with a low monotonous susurration, interrupted at long intervals by the sudden slashing of the boughs of the trees as the wind rose and failed. The night was well advanced, but both sympathy and curiosity held me a willing listener to my friend's monologue, which I did not interrupt by a single word from beginning to end. 10 years ago, he said, I occupied a ground-floor apartment in one of the row of houses, all alike, away at the other end of the town, on what we call Rincon Hill. This had been the best quarter of San Francisco, but had fallen onto neglect and decay, partly because the primitive character of its domestic architecture no longer suited the maturing tastes of our wealthy citizens, and partly because certain public improvements had made a wreck of it. The row of dwellings, in one of which I had lived, stood a little way back from the street, each having a miniature garden, separated from its neighbours by low iron fences and bisected with mathematical precision by a box-bordered gravel walk from gate to door. One morning, as I was leaving my lodging, I observed a young girl entering the adjoining garden on the left. It was a warm day in June, and she was lightly gowned in white. From her shoulders hung a broad straw hat, profusely decorated with flowers and wonderfully beribboned in the fashion of the time. My attention was not long held by the exquisite simplicity of her costume, for no one could look at her face and think of anything earthly. Do not fear, I shall not profane it by description. It was beautiful exceedingly. All that I had ever seen or dreamed of loveliness was in that matchless living picture by the hand of the divine artist. So deeply did it move me that without a thought of the impropriety of the act, I unconsciously bared my head as a devout Catholic or well-bred Protestant uncovers before an image of the Blessed Virgin. The maiden showed no displeasure. She merely turned her glorious dark eyes upon me with a look that made me catch my breath, and without other recognition of my act, passed into the house. For a moment I stood motionless, hat in hand, painfully conscious of my rudeness, yet so dominated by the emotion inspired by that vision of incomparable beauty that my penitence was less poignant than it should have been. Then I went my way, leaving my heart behind. In the natural course of things, I should probably have remained away until nightfall. But by the middle of the afternoon, I was back in the little garden, affecting an interest in the few foolish flowers that I had never before observed. My hope was vain. She did not appear. To a night of unrest succeeded a day of expectation and disappointment. But on the day after, as I wandered aimlessly about the neighborhood, I met her. Of course I did not repeat my folly of uncovering, nor venture by even so much as to long a look to manifest an interest in her, yet my heart was beating audibly. I trembled and consciously coloured as she turned her big black eyes upon me with a look of obvious recognition, entirely devoid of boldness or coquetry. I will not weary you with the particulars. Many times afterwards I met the maiden, yet never either addressed her or sought to fix her attention, nor did I take any action toward making her acquaintance. Perhaps my forbearance, requiring so supreme an effort of self-denial, will not be entirely clear to you. That I was heels over head in love is true, but who can overcome his habit of thought or reconstruct his character? I was what some foolish persons are pleased to call, and others more foolish are pleased to be called, an aristocrat. And despite her beauty, her charms and grace, the girl was not of my class. I had learnt her name, which it is needless to speak, and something of her family. She was an orphan, a dependent niece of the impossible elderly fat woman in whose lodging house she lived. My income was small, and I lacked the talent for marrying. It is perhaps a gift. An alliance with that family would condemn me to its manner of life, part me from my books and studies, and in a social sense reduce me to the ranks. It is easy to deprecate such considerations as these, and I have not retained myself for the defense. Let judgment be entered against me, but in strict justice, all my ancestors for generations should be made co-defendants, and I'd be permitted to plead in mitigation of punishment the imperious mandate of heredity. To a mesalliance of that kind, every globule of my ancestral blood spoke in opposition. In brief, my tastes, habits, instincts, with whatever of reason, my love had left me, all fought against it. Moreover, I was an irreclaimable sentimentalist, and found a subtle charm in an impersonal and spiritual relation which acquaintance might vulgarize and marriage would certainly dispel. No woman, I argued, is what this lovely creature seems. Love is a delicious dream. Why should I bring about my own awakening? The course dictated by all this sense and sentiment was obvious. Honor, pride, prudence, preservation of my ideals, all commanded me to go away. But for that I was too weak. The utmost that I could do by a mighty effort of will was to cease meeting the girl, and that I did. I even avoided the chance encounters of the garden, leaving my lodging only when I knew that she had gone to her music lessons, and returning after nightfall. Yet all the while I was as one in a trance, indulging the most fascinating fancies and ordering my entire intellectual life in accordance with my dream. Ah, my friend, as one whose actions have traceable relation to reason, you cannot know the fool's paradise in which I lived. One evening, the devil put it into my head to be an unspeakable idiot. By apparently careless and purposeless questioning, I learned from my gossipy landlady that the young woman's bedroom adjoined my own, a party wall between. Yielding to a sudden and coarse impulse, I gently rapped on the wall. There was no response, naturally, but I was in no mood to accept a rebuke. A madness was upon me, and I repeated the folly, the offence, but again ineffectually, and I had the decency to desist. An hour later, while absorbed in some of my infernal studies, I heard, or thought I heard, my signal answered. Flinging down my books, I sprang to the wall, and as steadily as my beating heart would permit, gave 3 slow taps upon it. This time, the response was distinct, unmistakable. 1, 2, 3, an exact repetition of my signal. That was all I could elicit, but it was enough. Too much. The next evening, and for many evenings afterwards, that folly went on, I always having the last word. During the whole period I was deliriously happy, but with the perversity of my nature I persevered in my resolution not to see her. Then, as I should have expected, I got no further answers. She is disgusted, I said to myself, with what she thinks my timidity in making no more definite advances, and I resolved to seek her and make her acquaintance, and what? I did not know, nor do I now know what might have come of it. I know only that I passed days and days trying to meet her, and all in vain. She was invisible as well as inaudible. I haunted the streets where we had met, but she did not come. From my window I watched the garden in front of her house, but she passed neither in nor out. I fell into the deepest dejection, believing that she had gone away, yet took no steps to resolve my doubt by inquiry of my landlady, to whom, indeed, I had taken an unconquerable aversion from her having once spoken of the girl with less of reverence than I thought befitting. There came a fateful night, worn out with emotion, irresolution, and despondency. I had retired early and fallen into such sleep as was still possible to me. In the middle of the night, something Some malign power bent upon the wrecking of my peace forever caused me to open my eyes and sit up, wide awake and listening intently, for I knew not what. Then I thought I heard a faint tapping on the wall, the mere ghost of the familiar signal. In a few moments it was repeated. 1, 2, 3. No louder than before, but addressing a sense alert and strained to receive it. I was about to reply when the adversary of peace again intervened in my affairs with a rascally suggestion of retaliation. She had long and cruelly ignored me. Now I would ignore her. Incredible fatuity. May God forgive it. All the rest of the night I lay awake, fortifying my obstinacy with shameless justifications and listening. Late the next morning, as I was leaving the house, I met my landlady entering. "Good morning, Mr. Dampier," she said. "Have you heard the news?" I replied in words that I had heard no news, in manner that I did not care to hear any. The manner escaped her observation. "About the sick young lady next door," she babbled on. "What? You did not know? Why, she has been ill for weeks. And now—" I almost sprang upon her. "And now?" I cried. "Now what?" "She is dead." That is not the whole story. In the middle of the night, as I learnt later, the patient, awakening from a long stupor of a week of delirium, had asked, it was her last utterance, that her bed be moved to the opposite side of the room. Those in attendance had thought the request a vagary of her delirium, but had complied. And there the poor passing soul had exerted its failing will to restore a broken connection, a golden thread of sentiment between its innocence and a monstrous baseness owing a blind, brutal allegiance to the law of self. What reparations could I make? Are there masses that can be said for the repose of souls that are abroad such nights as this, spirits blown about by the viewless winds, coming in the storm and darkness with signs and portents, hints of memory and presages of doom? This is the third visitation. On the first occasion I was too skeptical to do more than verify by natural methods of the character of the incident. On the second, I responded to the signal after it had been several times repeated, but without result. Tonight's reoccurrence completes the fatal triad, expounded by Parapelius Necromantius. There is no more to tell. When Dampier had finished his story, I could think of nothing relevant that I cared to say, and to question him would have been a hideous impertinence. I rose and bade him good night, in a way to convey him a sense of my sympathy, which he silently acknowledged by a pressure of the hand. That night, alone in his sorrow and remorse, he passed into the unknown.